Moonshine Jesus, baby, alright. Moonshine Jesus, a surprising delight. Moonshine Jesus, won't you shine a light?
Hello and welcome to the Moonshine Jesus Show. We are very glad you have joined us for this episode, where we'll be taking a look at season 3 of Picard, which has 3 episodes. So we're going to discuss those 3 episodes and come back maybe later this year and talk about how they wrapped up this, which is the final season. We do. Well, I know, it's so sad. Since you've heard him already, let's welcome Caleb. Glad you're here, sir. How you doing?
Hey, I'm doing awesome. How are you today, Mark?
I'm doing really well. I do want to remind folks that we are presented by progressivechristianity.org, a group that we very much encourage you to go and check out all the resources there. And, follow us as well, the Moonshine Jesus Show. You can pick us up on Facebook, and you also can download the podcast at all of your favorite podcast outlets. So grab that. And before we get going with our drinks, Caleb, reminder we must do every show, folks. This is not a spoiler-free zone. It is definitely a spoiler-full zone. So that all being said, Caleb, I'm looking forward to the show, but I'm also very curious. What drink did you decide to prepare for the show?
Okay, so I took my inspiration from a scene in the 3rd episode. Where
might have been my inspiration too.
I kind of had a feeling. I don't know. We'll see if we've gone to the same place on this. But there's a flashback scene where Riker is telling Picard about the birth of his son, and to celebrate, they are drinking whiskey, which is kind of fun because you don't see any whiskey really in a lot of the TV series before this. So I've taken my inspiration from that, and I have chosen my whiskey of choice, bourbon, and I've made an old-fashioned, and that's what I'm drinking today, because if it's good enough for Picard and Riker, it's good enough for me. How about you, Mark?
Of course it is. Okay. Well, I also took my inspiration from a scene where Picard and Riker were talking together, but this was the first episode where they were sitting together and having a drink. It turns out, though, they were having the exact same drink. Later, they talk about how Riker is a whiskey man. So I have in my with my com badge in my highball glass, poured neat, just like the two of them had in both the 1st and 3rd episodes. So cheers to you.
Cheers.
Here's to a great show. We'll catch you guys on right after the break.
Moonshine Jesus, Moonshine Jesus, Moonshine Jesus, Moonshine Jesus, won't you shine a light?
Hey, everybody, and welcome back to the Moonshine Jesus Show. We are moving into our geeking out section, so we like to geek out for a little bit and really enjoy the shows that we're watching. And then later on, we'll move into the theology and politics of the show. So we are talking today about Star Trek Picard, which features Sir Patrick Stewart reprising his iconic role as Jean-Luc Picard, which he played for 7 seasons of Star Trek The Next Generation and the 4 feature films. And this follows Picard on his next chapter in life. And this season, we're seeing a reuniting of most of the Star Trek The Next Generation crew. And I think the show's all the better for it. So Picard was the captain of my childhood. Mark,
Yes.
I grew up watching Captain Picard. And so I have been giddy about this show since it came out because I was a Trekkie and I've got a picture I found recently. Actually, I found a home video of me dressed as Captain Picard at a Star Trek convention when I was a teenager. Yeah. That's exactly how nerdy I was. So I've always loved this show, but you had a hard time with it. right?
Well, I have
Episode.
yeah, with the Picard, the Star Trek with where it's just Picard. The first two seasons, I kind of liked the first season, and I should say thanks for bringing up that Picard was the captain of your childhood.
I know. I said that
Picard,
very
I knew you
intentionally.
did. I knew you did. I knew you did. Picard was the captain of my college years. As a matter of fact, me and my college roommates took a long weekend and did a marathon of TNG. And so we were also quite geeky about it. Literally, we stayed up the entire weekend, every waking moment that we could, and watched the show back to back to back to back. So I loved it too. I love the character. I love all of the characters on the show. I kept having a hard time the first two seasons of this show. I thought the first season was reasonably okay, but they introduced Rafi, and I never really connected with Rafi or even completely understood Rafi's place, and it felt kind of convoluted to me. So, admittedly, I think I watched almost the entire first season the first time through, but had to go back and try to get back into it when season 2 was coming out. And then I can't tell you the number of times I restarted season 2 to try to get into it. And I just couldn't. But season 3, man, this is a whole new experience. Like,
It
for
is.
me, they should have named it something different. It doesn't even feel like the first 2 seasons of Picard. Yeah, we got similar characters, and yeah, some of the storylines are carrying through. But oh my gosh, it's so much better. So much better.
And that's one of the things that's really been unique about this is every season has had a very different story arc, and every season has felt quite a bit different. But what do you think it is about season 3 that has made it so much better? And we should say it's got like 100% fresh rating. So people like pretty unanimously agree this is a good show. What is it that helped it find its footing in its final season?
I think some of it is simply the nostalgia of seeing all of these characters coming back together and being able to watch them interact again. I also think some of it is the way that we are getting to re-experience these characters who had, 20 some years apart from each other. And we also have seen the way the writing room handles them differently. It used to be that you never really had any real conflict in between any of the characters on ship. That was sort of a hard rule. All conflict was external. And now we're getting to see all these little pieces of them having real dialogue and real relationships. The story writing is incredible. They're still doing incredible action scenes with these slightly aging actors, but they cut it up so well with these emotional moments. And I think one of the things they've done is as involved as the storyline is, they've stripped down the storyline more than it was in the first 2 seasons. It's a pretty low investment to get into the storyline, and it's interesting. There's just enough secrets that are teasing what might happen. I don't know. I mean, for me, that's kind of where it feels like they've hit on a lot of the things that are necessary to have a successful show. How about you? Why do you think it's where it is?
I think you're right. I think nostalgia factor and the relationship piece hit me very hard too, because there was also in previous iterations and certainly during Next Generation when it was on, there was a very clear structure, right? I mean, as much as Star Trek talks about being this message of peace and exploration stuff, it's also kind of militaristic in some respects, and there's a hierarchy, and it's clear who's in charge. Here, it's much less clear who's in charge, and when you get right down to it, they all have very different styles, and I think Picard and Riker in particular have different styles in how they assume leadership. And so one of the things that really hit me was that we got to see the evolution of these relationships and some difficulties that come when relationships last for a long time and when you become friends beyond working together. And I think that a lot of times we end a show and it's kind of happily ever after, right? And we don't get to see what those relationships really look like. So tell me, what do you think this says about relationships that go on for a long time? Do relationships that go on for a long time, do they tend to last? Are there sources of conflict as those go on? That was just something I was wondering about as I was watching it.
Yeah, I mean, I think at least in the way they're presenting these characters, it's definitely showing that the longer the relationship is, the more you know about each other, good, bad, and ugly, the more that if it's a good relationship, you provide a space where you're able to go to the bad places with each other and to point at issues and say, you got an issue right there. Why aren't you dealing with it? We didn't see that when they were younger. It was almost like they were early in their relationship and they were all falling in line to what the social expectations of how we interact as these new crew members with each other. But they've now had long lives where they've developed their relationships. And I think it's the value of having relationships that span decades. It's that you get to this real honest place where you know that you can challenge a little bit of a person where they might be having difficulties and know, but just because of your history, that the relationship will survive, right?
Yeah, and I think we really get to explore that with Picard and Riker, and I look forward to seeing how that's explored with other characters as well. But one of the relationships that we got to talk about, Mark, while we're geeking out, is Picard has a child that we discover in this, right? This is a big deal because this has been something that has been explored at length, and Picard has kind of come to terms with the fact that he's not going to have any children, and at least not any biological children. And, there's a whole concern about legacy. We have that explored at length in the Next Generation series and throughout the movies. And so here's my question, Mark. Does Picard having a child fundamentally change his character?
Well, it's a difficult question to answer only because he has only briefly had a child. And it is a very tested relationship thus far. And so has it changed him? I don't know that we've seen any indication that it has changed him in any large way yet. And maybe it's something we explore down a little further into our conversation, but I don't think it's changed him in any large way. I do think that we immediately see the internal conflict that pops up, because I'm going to take what you said about him a step further. Yes, in season 3, they talk about how he doesn't have children and, that whether or not he wanted to. But, he was never a person he had actually decided that he did not want a family. He had at some point, I can't remember whether it was one of the movies or during the TNG, he had actually said that because of who he was, he shouldn't have children, that he couldn't be a present father. And that and if you look back, particularly at TNG, man, when there were kids around, he wasn't, down on the floor with the kids and all happy. Matter of fact, frequently he was a little grumpy if there were too many kids around.
Shut up, Wesley.
Right. So I don't know. I mean, it's internal conflict that he's experiencing, and I think it's good that we see that. I'm going to be very interested to see how it plays out and impacts him moving forward. I will say, though, go ahead.
No, I've got a separate thought related to this, so you finish.
Okay. Well, mine's separate too, but it's related to it, but it's very different.
Okay.
It's just, for me, it's just about the show.
Yeah.
What an incredible 3 episodes, so much action, visually stunning, really interesting writing. For me, thus far, the single best scene in all of this show so far was Jean-Luc and Beverly in that room with just the two of them, where she knows that he knows, and he knows that she knows he knows, and they sit there, and there's that silent across. I love the framing of this. They put him on one side of the
shot.
frame. It's just brilliant, and it's silent. It is so well done. And then Beverly starts to explain how all this happened and why she didn't tell him. And when she talks about where they were when Jack was conceived, she says, we both knew we were at the end. Then he goes, I didn't. And he is such an incredible actor. I felt all the history, all the pain, all of the hurt. It was and it wasn't flashy. It wasn't in any kind of interesting room with all kinds of lights and stuff. It was in a plain room, lit well, and it was just the two of them responding to each other and being very real and having a real relationship, which is where I think it relates back to your question about relationships that survive over time. I just thought
And
it
I
was
think
brilliant.
that's the real strength of Star Trek when they lean into it, is that it's really all about the exploration of relationships. And that scene, I knew which scene you were going to talk. As soon as you said there was one scene that stood out, I knew it was going to be that one because of the way that it looked like they were close together until they framed out. You saw the physical distance to speak to the emotional distance between the two. So powerful. Back to his point about a child, I think it was in Star Trek Generations, where he loses his brother and his nephew, who are the legacy of his name, where he begins to come to terms with the fact that he wants a relationship ongoing and would love to have family. So one other question that I want to make sure that I get to, I want to pivot a little bit, Mark. Okay, so for most of Star Trek series, we get this vision of the future that Gene Roddenberry has, right?
Yeah.
Where we've got what would happen if humanity was at its best. What if we had this humanistic fulfillment of our potential? But I would say for maybe the past 20 years or so, Star Treks have been quite a bit different than that. And they haven't necessarily explored humanity at its best. There's a lot of infighting. There is the tension. There are conspiracies within the Federation. I'm curious, do you think Star Trek has lost the idealism that was originally built into it?
I think it 100% has lost the idealism that was built into it. But I think that's because that's not really what made Star Trek incredible. What made it incredible was that how much it was a pronounced reflection of who we were at the time. When TNG came out, middle class was growing. There was all this reason to think that whoever you were, you could be successful. We were seeing some movement in, at least it felt like it then, in civil rights movements when quality. Now, we were being sort of blind to a lot of things, but our kind of zeitgeist, we felt like that's what was going on. And Star Trek just took that and amped it up.
Yeah.
And, you know, as we have become seeing the middle class be destroyed and the hopefulness of a large majority of people who will be consuming this good deteriorating and fluctuating as they try to figure out how we're going to make ends meet and all those different things, we've seen it get to be a more, I would even go dark reflection of how do you remain hopeful in the midst of all this difficulty, even when you screw up sometimes. So for me, I think it's a reflection of the times it's being made in and trying to amp up the experience of the viewers. Am I going too far with that?
No, I don't think so. Because I agree that it's not the same kind of vision of the future. I think it's a much more realistic vision of the future because it shows that, you know, you really don't ever overcome being human. And maybe we don't try to overcome being human because that's like a part of life and a part of who we are. But I think it's clear even in the shots that we see, how much darker they are, even in the spaceships that are that, you know, are almost completely black in the interior now, that it feels darker and it feels very much like a reflection of this moment in which we're living, where we're not really sure what the future is going to be like. I think you're certainly right that when we're talking about the late 1960s, whenever Gene Roddenberry was kind of casting this vision, right? Yeah, that it was a much more hopeful time about what we could do with human progress. So, hey, look, I would love to geek out about Star Trek all day, and I would geek out about Star Trek all day. But you know what? We got to move into some more theopolitical stuff. We started talking about some already, but why don't we warp away for about 30 seconds? And we should try and do that after every segment. We should have made like and then we'll come back and we'll dive into the Theopolitico segment.
welcome back to the Moonshine Jesus Show. You've joined us for our Theo Politico segment. So the first thing that I really want to talk about, because in some ways, what we just talked about in our last episode relates to this in some ways. But also, I think a lot of what's being done in Star Trek Picard so far is kind of plays off of this idea. There's a scene in a hallway on the Titan where Riker's with Jack. And Riker says to Jack, "We're all faulty, just human." My question to you is, are we all faulty? Is that just part of being human? And how does that relate to the fall that we hear so much about in terms of Genesis?
So,
and what are your thoughts on, are we faulty?
Okay. Yes. So nobody's perfect, and I think that's good theology. That nobody does things right 100% of the time, and that's true. That's human nature. However, I don't think that we are inherently bad. That we are inherently evil or faulty or any of that. And I think that's bad theology. And so I try to tell people, hey, look, you are created good as you are. And Christianity gets this wrong. Christian theology gets it wrong. You're not fundamentally bad. You are fundamentally good, right? You're not bad with occasional goodness. You're good with occasional shortcomings. And that's okay, because that is human nature. So I think the whole idea of the fall is terrible theology. That wasn't a part of theology until Augustine invented it. And invented this notion of original sin. So that's whenever people start talking to me about original sin, said Jesus wouldn't have even known what original sin was, because that hadn't been invented yet. Exactly. So I think the whole notion of humanity being fundamentally bad and needing saving, saving from Jesus, and through death on the cross and atonement for sins. Bad theology. Jesus didn't know about that. Augustine invented it. I think if we're talking about human beings being fundamentally good and Jesus teaching us how to live better, that's 100% good theology. So so I think in the context that Riker means it, I think he's right. But in the context that Christians mean it, I think they're wrong. How about you, Mark? Where do you land on it?
I completely agree with you. In the context that Riker means that, I think yes. My problem is, and pop culture does this far too much, and the theological idea of original sin plays into it and amps it up. The problem is that we are faulty too quickly turns into we are broken. And I have a real problem with that language, because broken means you're something that you're not supposed to be. If a manufacturing line, let's say we're making toy cars, I don't know, Hot Wheels, and they're producing them bunches and bunches and bunches, and every one of them has a door that doesn't quite close right. Well, that's not a broken car. That's what that set of cars do. That's just what they do. They're not broken. That's part of who they are. It is what they are in total. I think we need to get away from trying to think that we're broken and have to be fixed, and start just realizing that we're human. And as you put it, that just means that we're more good than bad, and sometimes bad things happen, but that doesn't make us broken. There isn't this need to be fixed. That's where this atonement comes from, is that we're broken and must be fixed, and as humans, we're not even capable of doing it. We need some God to step in and do it on our behalf. I think that is one of the most dangerous concepts out there in terms of how it subconsciously encourages people to go about their lives. We're not broken. We're just simply human. We are humans trying to discover how much a part of love we really are. I have lots of problems with that language.
Oh, I agree with you. And I mean, we have enough hard things going on in life without people coming out and saying, and you know what, you're inherently sinful and you're going to hell unless you're redeemed and God has saved you. A shout out to Angie Archer, who reminds us of the original blessing theology, right? So not the original sin that Augustine invented, but the idea of original blessing in Genesis, where God looks at all creation and names it as good. And I agree that is so much better theology to hear affirmed from the very beginning that we are good. And I think if we hear that message, it's just like kids, right? If you tell kids they're bad, they start behaving in a bad way. If you tell kids they're good, then they listen to that and they believe in themselves and gain confidence. I think that's what we need to tell each other as human beings too. Hey, look, we are fundamentally good. We have the potential to do good in this world, and Jesus taught us how to do that a little better. Let's do it. And so I'm with you. Let's get rid of the faulty theology and let's lean into the created good theology.
Absolutely. Okay, I want to do another quote here and get your thoughts on part of what it seems like the show may be setting up. In this show, it was really fun. We get Worf back, but it's sort of Zen Worf. Like it's a Zen Worf, right? There's some Zen in Worf. I was starting every time he goes, oh, cool, yeah. Zen Worf, there he is again. So when he is he and Raffi are beginning to interrogate a prisoner.
Yeah.
And he says to the prisoner, there is no righteous cause, no good, no evil. You believe in your fight. First, I'm going to come back to this quote, okay? Because I want to continue something he says after it. Is there good and evil? He says there is no righteous cause, no good, no evil. That what we believe in is whatever we decide our fight is.
No, I mean, ultimately, I think there is a difference between better actions and worse actions. And so I think, like, for instance, if you are killing 117 innocent people, as this person has just done, that's an evil action. You know, and so I don't think we can say that that's morally ambiguous, because it's not. And especially as we find out more about the justifications for why this person is doing it, right? We find out they're a changeling and they're attacking humanity. So I understand where Zen Worf is coming from, but no, fundamentally, I thought that was an odd thing to say, and I didn't really find myself agreeing with it. How about you?
I did not agree with the overall statement that there's no good and evil. I'm completely with you. There are things that are more morally reprehensible, and for me, evil is a good word to put on that. So I do think there are those things, but I think that it was just kind of a little bit of sloppy writing, because what they seemed to be trying to say. His point was, you think that you're fighting for the righteous cause, essentially, but all you're really doing is believing in your fight. Because he later very quickly turns and says, the fight is rarely worth dying for. So I think there was some value in what they were trying to set up there. Is that, and we see this a lot, particularly in us being in the U.S., we see it in politics, where people actually get more wrapped up in winning the fight than in what is right and good, what is good and evil. And I liked his point that the fight is rarely worth dying for. I'm curious, though, we see people who almost seem like the fight is the cross they're willing to die on. What do we do to help people recognize this fight's not worth dying for, man?
Yeah, I think it's reframing. And so we have done things, we have set kind of people up against each other, and in many ways have lost seeing the humanity in each other. And I think reframing the conversation is often helpful. And so I think about, like, William Barber is someone who I think does a great job at reframing the conversation, right? Because he says this is not left versus right. liberal versus conservative. This is
Red
right
versus blue.
versus wrong. Right. It's right versus wrong. And
Exactly.
I think whenever you reframe the conversation to say you're
Mhm.
either on the right side of justice, or you're for oppression. And the first time that I heard him say that, I thought, well, that's a really great way to reframe. And so I think reframing is very important. And another piece of that quote that Worf said, I think, is also important. So
Yeah.
before he says that the fight is rarely worth dying for, he says, "Your anger is your enemy, and we're all
Yes.
the same." And so I don't know that we're all the same, but I think if we're talking about we all have commonalities, then that's certainly
Yeah.
true. And I think that often our anger is our enemy, because a lot of times people get so angry and worked up that we stop listening to reason, we stop listening to each other, we start dehumanizing other people, and we can no longer see any value in what they're saying. And I think this happens all across the spectrum. And so I think letting go of some of the anger and trying to recenter and reframe is one of the things that could really help us to move on. But geez, Mark, that's a big ask. Well, in the kind of political state that we're in, do you have ideas on how to get there? Because I don't think I have a solution to that.
Well, I think you did have a solution to it. I think reframing is a big part of it. And part of it is figuring out creative ways to not buy into the fight, because it's not a fight if one side doesn't buy into it. It takes more
Mhm.
than one. You can't have a fight when you're the only side. And I think we've got to figure out more creative ways of approaching whatever the issue that's being put forward, that's trying to be made this giant fight. We've got to figure out ways to present it so that you understand, help folks somehow see that they are really more about the fight rather than more about winning the fight rather than the outcome of the issue. Because I think more times than not, uh, uh, we agree on what we think the best outcome of an issue is if we can get rid of our need to be involved in this fight because our anger is fueling that
Mhm.
fight. So I think we've got to help people figure out how to do it. But I think the very first step, I think you were right on it, is to reframe the issue in a way that doesn't make it a fight.
Hmm. Hmm.
We could go on and on. We've got lots more that this show has been digging up, but we're not going to be able to do that right now. We are running out of time, so we're going to have to move into our next segment, one of our favorite segments, where we will both attempt to make our co-host look stupid. Engage.
Welcome back to the Moonshine Jesus Show. We are entering our final segment, the Make Me Look Stupid segment, where we get to try and make our co-hosts look stupid. Thanks for sticking around with us to the bitter end here as we ask some questions about Star Trek Picard. So let's see, Mark. One
Hmm.
that I want to know is
Okay.
Geordi LaForge is one of
Mhm.
my favorite characters from Star Trek: The Next Generation. I, both because I like the character and because I like LeVar Burton. You know, he was
Absolutely. Great person.
responsible for teaching a whole generation to read on Reading Rainbow. I love
Oh,
LeVar
yeah.
Burton. We haven't seen him yet. We've met his
Right.
daughter so far.
Very cool.
I want to know, what role do you think Geordi LaForge is going to play in this season? What do you think? Do you think he has a unique role? Is he uniquely
Yeah.
situated to help them solve any kind of a problem? How do you think he's going to
Oh,
enter in?
well, I've been struggling with that question, so I'm glad you asked because I'm really interested to hear your answer. So he's currently in charge of the historic museum or something like that. I can't remember the exact words that they used because Picard was going to send a very famous painting to him to have for his records there.
Mm-hmm.
But They make a real point in episode 3 to have his daughter say what a disappointment it was when the great engineer Geordie LaForge's daughter decided to be a pilot. I think that is a kind of quick little tip of the hat by the writer as to why Geordie is going to be important. I think we're going to see this mystery with these large holes that are opening that are multidimensional, or I'm guessing they probably also maybe relate to time, possibly. I think that they're going to need an engineer to come in to help them figure out either how to beat it or how they work, and that the person that's going to make the most sense in some way, one way or the other, is going to be Geordie. That technology seems to be a really important piece of technology because we've not really seen it in the Star Trek universe up until now, and it is clearly a weapon of sorts. So it's highly engineered. For me, that seems like it's got to be the reason he comes in. But I'm really not completely so. I just watched episode 3 a couple hours before this show, so I've not processed it as deeply as I could. What are your thoughts?
I think they're going to need Geordie's help to get out of their current situation. So we've last left them drifting, and the Titan is the ship they're in, and it's completely disabled, and they're going to the center of this thing that may be kind of living, this kind of energy source. I think they're going to need Geordie's help to get out of it. And then I think you're right. I think they're going to need to figure out what this is. And Geordie, genius that he is, I think is the only one who's going to come back. And I think Lore, we've seen some things with Lore. I think Lore then is going to come in and is going to be their foil. Okay, so I like that answer. I like that answer. What you got a question for me? I bet, Mark.
Well, you know me. I have a series of questions that play off of each other. So
I didn't steal any of them this week.
You almost did. You almost did. When you asked how did Picard becoming a father change him, you almost stole where I want to go with this.
Okay,
so
I want to see where you're going. Okay,
that scene that we both loved, right? With Picard and Beverly Crusher together talking about him being a father, and she talks about how she decided to not tell him. What if she had told him? So my first set of questions is, how would have becoming a father and being a father changed Picard? That's my first question.
Okay.
Assuming that he had known at birth.
Okay, so you want me to answer these one at a time this week, Mark, right? You're not going to rapid fire them.
No, okay, I think they're going to build. I think they're going to build on each other.
Okay, so he's. I think they said 20 some odd years.
23. I think it's 23.
And so I think had that been before the Romulan incident that Picard was helping out with, I don't think it would have made any difference. So even though I think, as I said earlier, that Picard had a desire to like carry on the family name and the legacy, this is something that we see explored at length. I think that Crusher is right in the fact that the galaxy is always calling out to Jean-Luc Picard. And I think that the son being born before that incident wouldn't have made a difference. He would have felt an obligation to help people. Now, after that all went south, I think instead of retreating to his chateau and his vineyard, I think he would have focused on his family and found meaning there. But I don't think that would have been as.
So you don't think it would have changed how he made decisions? Not that he wouldn't have been involved, but that he has a child that he needs to protect in some way. Like Beverly said, that the main goal of a parent is to protect their child. And we see that in the way it plays out with her relationship with Jack. I would argue, we also see that the loss of a child has changed Riker in terms of who he is. And I think some of the tension between him and Picard, as Picard is struggling with having a child, and they're trying to figure out who's leading the Titan. I would argue that a part of this tension is coming from him having lost a child and Picard having this child and, not being able to make his mind up about how he's going to interact with them.
I think you're 100% right about Riker. I think that Picard ultimately. I think this is a reflection. I think that scene is a reflection of my argument about Picard, because I don't think because Riker says you want to protect your son. I don't think that's what it is. I think Picard wants to win, because Picard always wants to win, and always thinks he will. And so I think that's a fundamental part of his character, is that there was nothing in his experience that made him think that he was going to lose against this ship that vastly outclassed the Titan.
Yeah.
He's Jean-Luc Picard, and he was going to win.
So that implies to a small degree that Jack would have grown up with an absent father. Do you think that would have changed Jack in any way from what we see right now?
That's an interesting question. So I think it depends, right? So I think if my supposition is correct, that Picard would have initially been an absentee father until things went wrong with the Romulans, and then he would have reinvested himself. Then no, I think that he would have grown up with a father, and it.
Well, I mean, that was far enough in that he would have had a bit of his childhood before Picard reinvested himself.
Yeah, but I think that I don't think it's ever too late to rebuild relationships. And so I think that, a child, even if their parent hasn't been involved in their life up to a certain point, it can change the outcome if they come back and are invested. And I think a lot of times in early childhood, kids see their parents, even absentee parents, as heroes, even if they shouldn't be perceived that way. And so I think that Picard would have come back, and I think that Jack would have entered Starfleet if Picard had been around in some way. But what do you think? It sounds like you think we would have ended up with the same Jack either way.
I think we would have ended up with the same Jack either way. Either because he ultimately has an absentee father, whether Beverly told him or didn't tell him. And I do think he would have been a bit of an absentee father with you. Picard is Picard. He wouldn't be unable to. He's going to have this sense of this horrible thing is about to happen to the universe, and only I can fix it. And is it better for this child to have in this moment a loving father, or is it better to make the universe a better place? And he's always going to choose, thinking that he can make the universe a better place.
That is Picard in a nutshell. The way you just summarize it, that is the way Picard sees the world.
The way he thinks, right?
Yeah.
Yeah, it's the way you think. So, but you said that you can mend relationships. So my question is, Jack seems very, very upset with Picard right now, which we don't really understand why, since he knows that Picard had no idea about him until just a few hours ago in terms of the time frame of the show. Do you think they'll mend the relationship?
Yeah, I think to some degree, I think that they'll build a relationship. I don't know what that'll look like yet, but I think certainly they will build their relationship. And if Picard survives the season, then maybe they'll go on their next adventure together, whatever that looks like. Because I mean, they've already killed him once, so who knows if he'll survive or not? But
I did notice, just for what it's worth, when they beamed them off of the other ship back onto the Titan, in the corner, we could see that there were 4 human bodies that were being beamed back. And I didn't think he had a human body anymore. Anyway, that just threw me off for a second.
I'll have to go back and look. I'll have to go back and look.
On the right-hand frame, you see 4 bodies signifying humans.
Interesting. Yeah.
But technically, he's not really human anyway. We could go on and on. We could geek out more and more, and we probably would if we had more time. But we've already gone far enough in this. I
finished your questions, Mark. There are no
my
more
whole
questions.
Line. I was prepared to go both ways. I wasn't sure how you were going to answer that one, man. I really wasn't sure. Like I could see making the argument that this is a guy who has a big heart, and maybe he would just invest all in his kid. And I was going to say at that point, if he invested all in his kid, what would that mean for the universe? And ask you the question that I would put into Picard's head of, is it better for the child to grow up in a loving family, or is it better to have this person saving the universe? But we didn't have to go there because you gave the better answer. Personally.
Sure. Listen, yeah, I like that.
You did. You gave the better answer. So
Yeah, thank
we
you.
let's talk a little bit about next week and what we're going to be talking about on that show.
Okay, Mark. So this week we've been talking about Star Trek. What do you think
Yes.
if next week we do a major pivot and we talk about
Oh,
Star Wars?
Wars. All right.
Yeah,
I
and
see where you're going.
still, we're in the third season of Picard. We're also in the third season
Third
of
season of
The
Mandalorian.
Mandalorian.
Yeah,
right.
absolutely.
So, and
It
we'll have
works for
what,
me.
2 episodes?
2 episodes at that point. They just dropped the
Okay.
first, which was really, really good. I liked it a lot. So yeah,
Yep,
I
me
kind
too.
of like that. And we just recently talked about Pedro Pascal and his other giant hit. So this could be a
Uh-huh.
lot of fun doing the compare and
Okay.
contrast between all 3 of these shows. So yeah, works for me. All right, folks, you have your assignment until next week. So please try to catch up. Just a couple of shows to watch. It'll be great fun having you with us live and throwing questions in chat when we do that. But until then, thank you. Thank you so much for either watching this live or downloading it on your podcast and seeing it through the entire show. We are very glad you made it with us. And until next time, thank you, and we'll see you on the Moonshine Jesus Show.
Moonshine Jesus.